Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this episode, we are discussing the manipulation of landscape photographs, Nature Photographers Network, and the pricing of art. Let's dive right into it, shall we? So how have things been for you, Ben?
Pretty good. Just getting settled in back at home, kind of getting back into the rhythm of daily life after the trip. So it's nice to have all that behind me now. Now a fair amount of work ahead of me to put everything together, and so that should be interesting. How about you?
A lot of new things popping up recently, actually. Started working a little bit with Nature Photographers Network,
Well, that's exciting.
working as the editor for the articles. So it's been a lot of emails going out, a lot of contacting of other photographers, trying to get fresh voices on the platform to really boost engagement. It's been interesting.
That's very cool to hear. I mean, since there's been a lot of various publications out there on landscape photography and lots of good fresh content out there, it'll be very interesting to see what's in store for NPN with future articles and stuff along those lines. So I've always enjoyed NPN, and so this sounds like they got the right person for the job. A person who's very good at writing, very good at taking photos, and apparently likes sending emails.
I don't like the sending the emails part, but no.
Yeah, that's probably the one part about existing in our modern world and trying to make a living. That's the tough part. But it's a necessity. But I guess it's better than physically writing letters. But
Yeah, you can't copy and paste physical letters as easily. That's
very true. Though there'd be less. It'd be less cut and paste errors. But yeah, actually, when I speaking of emails, whenever I email people, because through one of the ways I make a living with photography is through the voluntary contributions, and whenever someone contributes, I write them a thank you email, and I never do any cut and paste for that, just because I'm terrified that there will be some sort of cut and paste error. I'm going to put someone's name in there wrong or something like that. So I'm so paranoid about that. But yeah, I can relate. Emails, it's not the funnest, but it's necessary. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is. But going back to with NPN, you were saying about being interested to see how it goes. And what I found interesting with my own writing and trying to get on different publications is there are not a lot of places out there anymore that are interested in inspirational writings. It's all tutorial or how-to or like top 10 tips for landscape photography. It's not a matter of, it's so much more about the how of photography versus the why. And so being put in a place of command with NPN, it's nice that I'll have more control over the articles I could put on that are going to be more inspirational, so that people who want to write that kind of stuff can come on there and actually submit content and get their voice heard a little bit.
It sounds a lot like what's happened on YouTube in terms of in terms of the top 7 tips or whatever. It's very clickbaity stuff that unfortunately rises to the top, but there's just very little depth in that. Maybe it has something to do with our attention span when it comes to absorbing stuff these days. But there's nothing quite like reading a more long form article on something where you feel good about it afterwards, as opposed to I think people just want to be told what to do, but not why.
Yeah. They want to get, it's all about the destination, not the journey.
Yeah.
It's a matter of how can I get to a point of super success and be a professional photographer, but skip all the steps in between that are necessary.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it comes down to.
That's definitely been my experience with YouTube. And but one thing I have found, and hopefully this will also be very much be the case for NPN, is that when you do avoid all of the clickbaity sort of stuff, I think people really do latch onto that, and you will attract the right audience as opposed to, the vast audiences of people are just looking for it, looking for something free, looking for something quick. But in my experience, at least, the audience that you do attract when you try to put out something with more meaning, it's a longer lasting audience. It's people that actually appreciate, what goes into it, as opposed to just people clicking through.
And I think people engage more with it too, or at least more likely to, instead of just the typical, like, oh, good job, or the typical kind of posts or comments that you see on like Instagram or YouTube. And I think you get rid of a lot of the trolls too.
That's very true. That's actually 100% been my case, or that's been what I've experienced with YouTube. I very rarely have any sort of troll comments on there.
Now you're gonna have a ton.
Now I'm gonna have a ton. It's gonna be my email box.
Nonstop.
They're just gonna email me directly. Is what's gonna happen
I have
now.
I have 3 or 4 emails, Ben. I'm gonna send up so many YouTube accounts. You have no idea. You're gonna be swamped with a bunch of troll content now.
You're gonna have to get creative. Very creative.
I'll try.
Yeah. But yeah, like I very maybe 3 times a year I get some sort of troll comment. And actually it is kind of amusing because I usually just agree with the person, and it just throws them off so much that they usually go back and delete their own comment. So
because they didn't get what they wanted.
Yeah, it did not give them what they wanted. It just like short-circuited something in their brain. So I actually enjoy it a little bit when I get them, but I'm not suggesting people give me troll comments, but I think you're very right about that in terms of that sort of content. It's going to be the opposite of troll bait, whatever that is.
I mean, I don't think NPN really has that many trolls to begin with, because
no.
Like, I was talking to someone on it, and why are you gonna pay, what is it, like $50 a year to be a troll?
Yeah.
Like, what? Spend your money elsewhere, like, to do that. You can do that for free. So yeah. So I don't think we really have that issue.
Yeah, and also NPN is not. It's not a anonymous sort of thing. I mean, people are posting there for their name, under their name. They have, it's the brighter side of the internet and online communities and such. But yeah, I do look forward to what's going to emerge with the new sort of content, and to go along with the existing community. So that's very exciting to hear, and I think they got just the right person in charge of it.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. Hope I live up to your expectations here, Ben. Now that we're officially, well, as of this recording, we're officially live with our podcast, which is very interesting.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, really. I was listening back to it, and I made brief mention of one of my photographs that I took. Where was that? I think it was just on some random trail, now that I think about it. But anyway, and with that photograph, I did quite a bit more manipulation than I usually do. If you go onto my website, it's entitled Detritus, and it's like a pine branch thing on almost a white background. And
Mhm.
when I first photographed that, I pictured it as it shows up on my portfolio. But the reality of the situation was a little bit different because there was a lot of little debris that had fallen down onto the ground with it onto the snow. So it wasn't as pristine.
Mm.
So I made the decision to go ahead and manipulate that, to go into Photoshop after I scanned in the film and to clone out as much debris as I could without going completely overboard to a point where it's truly a pure white background. And I know from your videos, and you are quite open about this, about placing leaves on certain points of interest, like on the ground, to make the photographs stand out a little bit more. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that whole idea of landscape photography's, like the manipulation and the morals behind it, because that can be a hot button topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a tricky subject. I'm looking at the photo that you shot right now, and I can see how having a very clean presentation of that image is something that reflects your original vision of that scene, otherwise known as an original. Very good word. But I could see how your vision for the scene was to have the structure of this small pine branch against a very clean background, just to emphasize that negative space. And you said it was a bunch of like little twigs and or like small elements that were within that scene that you got rid of.
Yeah, just debris, dirt, just like you said, little twigs here and there. Nothing, it was nothing huge, nothing that was bigger than the main subject itself, but nonetheless, it was still had to be taken out.
Was it something that when you were in the field, you would have the ability to physically sort of preen that scene and clean up the little bits, or was it something where it was absolutely necessary to really do that after the fact?
If I would have had a small brush with me or like a paintbrush or something to kind of like swish it away, but even then I think it would have damaged the snow that was underneath and caused imperfection that would have further ruined the composition as a whole.
But the key thing is that really this is what you were more or less envisioning when you were
Right.
taking the photo.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and see, there's something to be said about that. There's, I'll take photos where I will place some subjects. I will say I don't do it quite as much anymore. Not that I have anything against it, but one of the things I learned was that for a very close-up small scene, it's fairly easy to do this in a very natural way. I have a photo called, I think, The Eternal Optimist. And it's a red maple leaf set against some swirls of partially dried sand in a wash in Zion. It's all in reflected light. And that is a scene I had to create, but the elements were all nearby because there was the maple tree was just overhanging the particular scene I was in, and I grabbed that leaf from maybe about a foot or two away and then placed it right there. And for me, that was sort of the hand of the artist creating the scene. And I find it works well for the small scenes like that, but I find it doesn't work very well for a wider view, where there is, let's say, a wider view of a wash, and then there's just some leaves just placed on a rock somewhere in the foreground. To me, that never looks natural for whatever reason. And I suppose it's probably because of the added context of the scene where it just doesn't seem as believable. But I don't do that. But I will do the close up shots and just arrange things purely from a visual standpoint. The pine branch that you photographed, did you also place that there, or was that already there?
That was already there.
Got it.
That was one of those things that I just kind of stumbled upon, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have thought of photographing it or even placing it on pristine snow,
Yeah.
let alone placing it on snow that isn't pristine and then having to do all that work afterwards would be kind of dumb.
Now, were you picturing when you're photographing that scene? Were you picturing some of those old sort of sketches of various specimens of plants and stuff? Because it looks so much like one of those hand-drawn sketches that has like this really very cool aesthetic to it. Was that something you had thought of at all, or?
No, but I see the resemblance now that you mention it, and that is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It always amazes me what other people see.
Yeah, and I could also see that perhaps this is a sort of image that leads down a path for a project of some sort too. So it is a very interesting sort of image, because I can see it could lead down that direction as well. If I'm photographing a scene in Death Valley, for example, and it's in a canyon, there's kind of a sand gravel mix on the floor of the canyon. I'll go through and I will maybe throw some sand down or kind of smooth out the footprints a little bit if it's an area where they're sort of obvious. So I'll do stuff like that to clean up a scene. I'll look for distractions that are in the scene that I know it's easier just to spend a little time getting rid of that.
But you're always upfront about having done that.
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. Like for us to do something like that and then say, "Oh, this is how I found it," is completely different than saying, "No, I helped the scene along to make it into the composition that I envision in my mind."
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, too, I think a lot of people, and this has been going on since the inception of photography, the idea that photographs are true to form, that photographs can't lie. And we all know that that's been disproven more and more recently through like fashion photography and all of the filters that we use for posting on Instagram and all of that. But we also have to look at other art forms, like even like landscape paintings. I mean, when people are painting landscapes, they aren't necessarily including every single thing that's in the scene. They're picking and choosing how they represent what they see in front of them.
Yeah.
And I think when you're making art using the craft of photography or the medium of photography, you should be allowed that same leeway.
Do you think the trust in photography has been forever broken?
To a degree. To a pretty large degree, yeah. Because, I mean, you look at all of like the journalists, even from the beginning of that era, and it's always about what's excluded versus what's included. I mean, you can come to a war scene and be taking a photograph of somebody dying, but you're not including the causation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I look at I think there's a famous picture of a starving kid in Africa with a like a buzzard behind them, and then it gets into this whole idea of like morals with photography, and the idea that why are you taking a photograph but not doing anything to help them directly? But then you also don't know the context behind it too.
Yeah.
So I think that leads really into the whole idea of trust with photography, that you don't have it as much as what we may once have.
And it seems that the more manipulated images have become, and I'm not just talking about just like Photoshop, but just in terms of choosing, specific context, specific angles, the more they become manipulated, the more we as the audience just feel like we're being manipulated in a way. There isn't as much of a sense of honesty in it as there is with video, because that's definitely one of the things. I mean, certainly because it's more difficult to change the content of video. Obviously, it can be edited, but with everyone having a cell phone, if some sort of major world event happens and you see video of it, you assume some degree of reliability to that in a way that we do not have with photographs, where you see a photo and you just assume that it's not true and that photo is being used perhaps to try to manipulate you for one reason or another. If it's, some context other than, it's, not the context of me taking a picture of a cool box elder tree in Zion. I'm not trying to manipulate someone with that, but just like in the news and stuff along those lines. I also wonder if video will get to that point at some point where we have no inherent trust in that either.
I think it's already getting to that point.
Yeah.
You look through like TikTok or YouTube Shorts now, where you have people that are even like the fun prank videos that some people do. It's still a matter of deception to a degree.
Yeah.
Whereas you're watching this video and you think that something's happening and you're believing it, and at the end of the video you're like, oh, that was really staged. Yeah. Or, oh, that's so fake.
That's very true.
And even when it comes to like news, video is the same with any kind of art. It's all about what's not included versus what is.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at videos of like people recording the quote unquote Karens in the supermarkets and all of that. But they start recording or they start the video at a very specific time.
Yeah.
So what led up to that? Like, is that person truly in the wrong, or are you just painting that picture? So I think video is not as untrustworthy as photography is at the moment, but I think in like 5 years it'll be just as bad, if not worse.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And it'll be interesting to see how that involves. Certainly not in a great way. When it does come to the editing of photos, I usually try to keep things like talking about from a Photoshop standpoint. Usually, any sort of changes I do to that image are oftentimes things that I perhaps noticed while photographing it, and it was in the forefront of my mind. Or it's something where there's something that stands out just a bit, where it distracts a little bit once I have it on the computer. And there's a way that I've sort of a different approach I've taken to editing out those distractions. And it wouldn't work for your photo of the pine branch, but I like to call it octopus editing, where if there's a distracting element, I think a lot of people will just reach for the clone tool or the healing brush or something along those lines. But I found that I've been a lot more successful by doing a very specific selection of that area and then just using the curves tool to make it blend in with everything else.
So kind of like a dodging, burning kind of implementation.
But with color, with contrast, basically all the control you have with curves. As an example, there was a photo I shot this past fall. I call it Symphony in Green. It's this long wavy grass in Zion it had been weighted down by early fall snow, and just really, really cool looking grass. and then there are some fall leaves that are sprinkled in there. And the leaves are fairly sparse. Most of them are fairly green still. They're actually falling off the tree green. But in the extreme lower left corner, there were, I don't know, like a handful of leaves, like 4 leaves or so. They're all next to each other, and they were yellow, and they were pretty close to the edge. So I went in with a specific selection of those leaves and basically made them look like the other green leaves by tweaking the curves and some other things along those lines, just to make them basically visually disappear.
Right.
Because that photo, with all the grass waving through it, you can't just clone things out. Because, yeah, like each blade of grass, it's like a tamper-proof fiber within that photo. So I'll do that, and then there's another photo where it was this maple leaf that was frosty set against some other maple leaves, and actually was a leaf I did place there. I forget the title of that photo, but with that image, there was a very distracting red leaf to the right, which is the same thing I selected. It's called Leaves and Frost. Very creative title on my part. I'm not sure why I didn't think of that just now. But yeah, there was a very distracting red maple leaf that was just sticking out. And so I camouflaged it. So that's another technique that I'll use if I can't get rid of something in the field that's a distraction. If I can't clean a scene, I'll try to camouflage it as opposed to just obliterating it. But in the case of your photo, you need the clean background. So that's something where you definitely need to have that clean white background, which really gives the original vision you had for the scene.
Right. And I think your whole octopus editing, pretty much what they did back in the day, back in the darkroom, because it was a lot more difficult to clone things out. You didn't just throw it into software and just tell it what to do. It was more of dodging and burning selectively to lower the attention on unkind aspects of the photograph.
I can't even imagine having to try to do that in a color darkroom. I mean, that's...
Oh, no.
Black and white seems like, to make something a little darker perhaps, a little lighter, whatever it is you got to do to help disguise it. But for color, because you get all kinds of color casts that go with it. So, yeah, nothing but respect for people that have done that.
Black and white is nothing but tonality.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell to anybody that asks me for like any kind of advice. Like I was on a workshop the one time and we did this critique afterwards, and someone had tried to make a black and white photograph and it wasn't successful, and I just kind of spoke up and was like, it's all about tonality. And I think that's the biggest difference between color and black and white, in that in color you're relying more on the individual colors, versus in black and white it's all about like the tones, the variations of gray that you ultimately have, which really helps with doing this kind of editing.
Yeah.
And I, like you said, I could not imagine trying to get it. Printing color was hard enough back then. And you look at like photographs from Elliot Porter in some of his books, and the tonalities, or the colors rather, are so, they're just odd, just because of how they were printed. But that's the best that they could do.
And actually, speaking of black and white, there was this one photo I shot on my recent backpacking trip, and the light was flat. It's not going to make for a good color photo, but the composition is pretty solid. And it's a subject I hope to go back and rephotograph when the light's a little bit better. But just for kicks, I decided to convert it into black and white because there was some interesting form in the picture. And since I was working with a color scan, I was just going through the various built-in color filters within the black and white conversion. And when I hit the one for infrared, man, that image looked gorgeous. It was...
Oh, yeah.
It was this lush green cottonwood set against some red cliffs with some sort of boulders framing it in the foreground. And the moment I did that, And then when I switched it to the infrared mode, and then all of a sudden those leaves went really light colored and they popped from the red cliffs. The moment I did that, it had so much depth. And I was looking at the scene going, oh man, I know I couldn't quite do that with actual black and white film because it's not going to pop it the same way. Just seeing how it felt like it was glowing from within. I saw that, I'm like, I think I'm going to end up having to go down this path at some point of just experiencing, the black and white way of working, because I feel like I'm kind of venturing in that direction a little bit. But our conversation on that reminded me of that image, and it was a little bit of an awakening sort of moment to realize what sort of beauty is there that's hidden in black and white.
Yeah, especially when you go infrared.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that was just one of like the little filters or whatever that they have on there, but infrared has always interested me in a menial way, but it's something that I've always wanted to try with like film. But the issue that I've always found with it is infrared film is also very thin, so handling it can be a massive pain. And on top of that, at least from my understanding, I might be incorrect in this, but you need a specific filter to go along with it as well. And each filter will help to control that light in a better way to get the effects that you want. I can see in black and white. I know at least generally what an image is going to look like once the film is developed and scanned in. But with infrared, I have no idea. And to a degree, that's kind of scary. I mean, that's a whole different ball game that you're getting into then, because you're just playing.
Every photo is going to be a bit of a surprise, and then you also wonder if, in that sense, since you and I both will select subjects to convey something, to reflect a particular emotion or feeling, or to convey something, and I can see how with infrared, where you don't really know. I mean, you can guess, perhaps, but perhaps a lot of that would just be, based on seeing the results afterwards and then seeing if it agrees with what your vision was for the scene. But that would add another level of kind of another barrier between you and the work, which, and also I would imagine there might be some sense of novelty to it, where at a certain point it's like, all right, we get it. Trees have white leaves. That's cool,
Yeah, you have, like, how far can you push it before people are like, all right, I'm over this.
Yeah.
But I mean, that goes with anything too. I mean, look at Velvia.
Yeah.
I mean, people, I'm sure there are people out there who are like, really, you're still using Velvia? You can't try something new?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, on the topic of Velvia, I had 3 boxes left, and it hasn't been my primary choice for film for a while now, because I find I end up having to fight the images where it's not quite was hoping for. It takes things a little too far sometimes, most of the time. And so I swapped my final 3 boxes of Velvia with my friend Michael Strickland for 3 boxes of Provia, because I figured at least someone's going to use the film. It's going to go to good use. And I know he has a huge stockpile of film, but I could use that Provia so much more.
Speaking on Provia, and it's kind of in line with you yearning to go black and white or thinking in that direction, I've been thinking a little bit about trying out Provia, especially for this trip to the Smoky Mountains.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about it. I mean, I've been shooting strictly in black and white for 5 years as of this year. And so to even think about trying out a color film, but that comes with the whole idea that you were always saying that slide film is just so much, there's something to it that I just want to experience based on how you've talked about it and how others have talked about it. How it's like nothing else when you put it on the light table.
Yeah. Yeah, because it tricks your brain into thinking you're looking at the actual scene in a way that you can never recreate that in a print. You can never recreate that with a scan. with whether you have a print or a scan, it feels like you're looking through a dirty window compared to looking at the actual film on the light box, where just everything looks so real. But also, it'll be very. I mean, I think it'll be a fantastic experiment for you to try, not a inexpensive experiment.
Yeah, that too.
It's got to be. I don't know. Is it like 3 times as much as black and white film, maybe more, somewhere in that range?
Something like 3 times as much, and then you get like a quarter the amount.
Yeah, that's very true. But it'll be interesting because, with color, oftentimes, we choose subjects where we're using the color itself to give some degree of depth to the scene. And a subject that works well for black and white may fall flat on its face for color.
Right.
So it'll be interesting in the same way that I know it would take me a while to build up the skill set to shoot black and white.
You're looking at totally different worlds
for you to shoot color.
Yeah.
But I would think that there's going to be some things that cross over. Like things that you learn from the experience of shooting color, you might perhaps take some of that to somehow shooting black. I don't know how it would go that way. I feel like it goes the other way more so.
I think I would have a better, I don't know how to word this right. Going from black and white to going to color, I think would be easier than going the opposite.
Yeah.
Because with black and white, you're looking at a scene very differently because you don't have the color to rely on to carry it.
It's a much more complex process in terms of your choices and such.
Right. You have to be looking at the tonalities and you really have to see the scene in black and white. And one thing that I've always found to be helpful, especially in the beginning and even now for some scenes, is I'll take my phone and just take a picture of the scene and then convert that to black and white, because at least that way I get to see how every color reacts, because it's all going to react differently. But then you add on filters, like a red filter to make the sky go black and the blues darken up in the scene, but that's also going to affect the greens and it's going to affect every other color too. So then it gets tricky as well.
Do you simulate those filters on the phone as well, or do you just like hold the actual color filter up in front of it to see that, or is it just based on your experience of how you know it's going to look with that filter?
The filters are always just kind of experience based. I haven't had very much luck in terms of holding up the filter or taking a picture through the filter to get that same effect, because the camera tries to compensate for all of that red. Right now I only use a red filter. I use a deep red filter, and it adds quite a bit of contrast to my photographs, which I like, but only in specific times. So it can get, you're kind of on a crapshoot sometimes with how different aspects will react.
Yeah, that's a whole nother layer of options, which also I see as why black and white is seen as why it can be so much more of an expressive format, because you can make those decisions as an artist, as opposed to color where it kind of is what it is, which actually kind of leads to something else a little bit, and something I've been thinking about a little bit is the art world doesn't really have much of an appreciation for color landscape photography. And it has very much accepted black and white. But to me, it seems if it's more difficult to evoke some degree of emotion with color photography, and if a person can do that, that should be a pretty impressive feat when it comes to photography, because there's a lot less tools at play.
I think the other thing that has to be considered is the art world versus society as a whole, like on Instagram and that kind of deal.
Yeah.
the art world, it's always wanted to be separated. And so you see, like on Instagram, color photography rules.
Yeah.
Black and white, at least in my experience, and as a whole, you don't see a lot of it, especially with landscape photography. And even when you do, it's not, the level of appreciation isn't quite there. So I think with the art world, they've always stuck with the roots, stuck with the, when it comes to photography, silver gelatin, platinum palladium, the old processes that are tried and proven to last and be worth the money. I mean, that's why guys like David Brookover still use silver gelatin and platinum palladium and photogravure, because there's some kind of prestige with it, and inkjet doesn't have that as a whole. And
Yeah.
so then you get into the whole thing with color. Most people are going to be printing inkjet with color photographs, so then it's not going to be seen as to that level as what like silver gelatin and platinum. And I think that's a big part of it too.
It also seems to be a product of the way that the work is viewed, which is kind of what you were saying there. In terms of the actual, presentation and how it's created, but in terms of, color versus black and white, in terms of mainstream stuff viewed on a phone, we're definitely more used to color imagery on there, and perhaps that's why the black and white kind of falls into the background a little bit. It doesn't jump off the screen, so people aren't going to be as attracted to it. So versus, if you go to a gallery and you have a like let's say one of Clyde Butcher's beautiful photos, darkroom prints from the Everglades, framed and lit nicely on a wall, that image is going to look like it's glowing from within in just an absolutely beautiful way, because in that presentation really helps so much with, the black and white. But if you have a color image that is printed the same size and the same scale, it won't do as well. So it seems like a lot of that is a product of how we view things, how we absorb things. So I can definitely see how the art world embraces the art that would display very well in a traditional gallery setting.
Yeah, that's a whole different world that you're looking at then too.
Yeah.
A whole different level of prestige, and you have to have, at least from the people, and you look at guys like Peter Lick, and you've got to have some kind of ego to, and actually you have to think pretty highly of your own work in order to get noticed and have other people think just the same. But yeah, that's a whole different ball game that like I said, I tried to get into years ago and was just, I won't try again.
That was actually one of the reasons why I started doing the YouTube stuff to begin with. Just the experience of, having some photos I really liked, having them nicely framed, and just getting no traction whatsoever. And then you realize that it's, far more than just the work. A lot of it is the established name and everything that goes into it. And I'll say I've always had some degree of a kind of a resentment towards the high end art world, where, especially when it comes to when there's lots of money at play, it seems to take something that was perhaps originally created in a very pristine state, in a very, with very good meaning, and then it kind of makes it in the end all about money and name and all the sort of the human side of things. And so I've also not really been much of a person to pursue the galleries. I do think there is something to be said about keeping art affordable, and so you can see firsthand the impact it has on the person that buys it. and you can hear more so why it is that the person selected the print that they chose, and to keep it where it is obtainable by the average person. So that's been a little bit more my approach along those lines. Not that I had the choice of, galleries, knocking on my door saying, "Hey, we want to sell that for $500,000. You in?" I'm like, "No, I'd rather sell it for $200." So
Yeah, really.
yeah,
That brings me to the idea that Brooks Jensen brought up. He has a whole course on lens work about it, I think, and he talks about the idea of artwork being for everyone and pricing it so that anyone can afford it. I mean, he sells his prints. I don't know what size they are, maybe 8x10s or so, or at least he used to, and for like $20.
Oh wow.
Which, I mean, even Guy Tall, he's selling his work for his 8x10s are like $50 right now, plus I think $10 shipping, whatever. And Brooks goes along with this whole mantra of a quick dime is better than a slow quarter. And I wanted to see what your take on that was, because looking at on your website and everybody prices their work differently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alex Burke prices his based on what people at art shows can afford, and versus you have a little bit different of an audience, so you can price yours higher. But I'm curious to hear your take on that idea of artwork being for everyone and pricing it so people can afford it. Because I mean, going onto your website, I mean, there's not much that I can afford past like the box set, unless I'm actually saving specifically for it.
Yeah, and the pricing, I've tried to reach some degree of kind of a middle ground. Initially, I set my prices based on the expenses that I incur in the creation of it. So basically a drum scan is necessary for the film, which is a couple $100 or so. And then, the film itself and all that. And to the point where if a person were to order the smallest size print that I offer it, which at this point is 11x14, I priced it at about $300 because that basically covers my expenses to create it. Now, if I wasn't shooting film, or if I was shooting black and white, or if I was shooting some other thing where my expenses were a bit less, it would have affected the prices I offered it at. I'll say that I sell enough prints to make it worthwhile, but also I don't exactly have people breaking down my door after the gallery people broke down my door to buy the print. So for me, it's kind of it's not something I count on, but it's like an added bonus to it. But that's how I set up my price, and then I looked at the various sizes from there. With the box sets, I always found that that's a way of making it a bit more affordable to the masses, and that's something also that I know that Brooks Jensen is known for, because I don't know if he pioneered the box set.
I think he did, but I mean, I know that he pretty much pioneered the idea of the folio, because I think he was like, I remember watching the video that he has on Lenswork about him and saying about how he had no idea what to call them because there was nothing like it before.
Yeah. And I remember hearing, and I don't know if there's any truth in this, but I remember hearing something about like Ansel Adams offering some sort of portfolios that no one bought or something along those lines.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's any truth to that.
Yeah, he did do portfolios. I thought they were pretty successful though. But then again, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Never met the guy, so I don't really know.
Yeah.
But I know that he did do portfolios of some of his work. I'm trying to think.
But I would imagine probably not at the affordable price point, compared to what things could be offered for now. Because I don't know if that was when he was already a very well established or if it was early on. But yeah, having one of those these days would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, it would. But I think those were pretty mid-career, maybe.
Okay.
I think. I'm not sure. If I find out, I'll put some notes in the show notes about it. Because I'm curious now.
Back to the topic of pricing the work to be affordable. There was something that early on when I was getting into photography. I mean, it's hard to ignore the galleries where you have these large images that are being sold for basically as much as a car. And the fact that there is a market for that, but it's a very small market, which leads to a sort of a feast or famine sort of income when it comes to it, and probably a lot of pressure that comes with it. And I've never really had any real desire for that. I would much rather sell work to people that actually appreciate it. But I remember when I was first getting into it, there actually was a case of this. I used to work at a camera store, and there was a guy who used a point and shoot camera, and he would just take snapshots around town, and he sold them as postcards. He made a lot of money. He did very well for himself. And it was literally with like a little Canon point and shoot camera, something along those lines. And I suppose that's sort of the ultimate in terms of very inexpensive. They were, I don't know, who knows what they were at the time. Maybe it was $1, $2 or whatever it was for the postcard. But he did very well for himself. Now, would you call that art? Everything's art, but it's definitely different than the approach of selling prints where you put as much time and effort into it and everything else along those lines. But it's something where we definitely need to find the balance.
I've always struggled with it quite a bit, actually, and that's why I don't sell prints actively on my website. I go back and forth all the time, and anytime that I release some sort of print store, I always take it down like a month later because it just doesn't get the traction, or for one reason or another. And I think a main thing with that is around pricing, because I agree with Brooks. I think art should be affordable, and to the point where you're not going to blow the bank to get a piece of art.
Yeah.
For instance, there's a piece by Michael Kenna that I would absolutely die to have. It's my favorite photograph of his. But I can't really justify dropping $3,000 on a print.
Yeah.
And that's before framing, too.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was going to mention. It's not super often, but sometimes if a person purchases one of my prints and then they take it framed, they'll come back to me like, the frame cost twice as much as the print did, or cost 3 times as much as the print did. To which I'm like, pretty good deal for the print, huh? So,
yeah.
So that's within the context of how much the frame itself is. I think that also gives a little bit of context for it.
Yeah, but going back to that, like I said, I always wanted my art to be affordable to people, and I like how Guy does his in terms of pricing. But even looking at his recently, like his 11 by 14s are, I think, $200.
Okay.
His 16 by 20s, I think, are $500. So his larger works are definitely up there. And I think he kind of splits the difference there with his 8 by 10s being so much cheaper.
Yeah.
But I think there's a very thin line that you have to tread when it comes to pricing your work cheaper. Because since everybody has a camera and everybody is able to go out and make prints of whatever they want, if you go too cheap with it, then you have the whole idea of value.
Yeah.
Is it actually worth spending the $25, or is it just crappy art that you are just trying to pawn off kind of deal? But then you go too high and people complain too. So
there was a story, some book I had read a long time ago for college, and it was it was talking about selling stuff, and there was a mistake at a jewelry store, and they accidentally priced some of the jewelry higher than it should have been. When they're supposed to mark it down, they marked it up,
and they sold a lot more.
Yep. Yeah, because there was a perceived value with it, which one has to walk a fine line, because at a certain point that just builds into marketing hype. But also there is a certain point where you might think less of something if it's too inexpensive, if it's too easy, especially in our modern culture with everything. So many things are mass produced, and
Right.
we want to avoid that sort of aspect of it. So I think one does need to find that middle ground. And also I think that's one of the reasons why the box sets that's been a path that I've pursued, where it kind of gives an excuse to sell the work for a rather reasonable price, but in a way that doesn't cheapen it. So that's been my theory behind it as to why it's been fairly well embraced.
Yeah. I mean, if you break down the individual price, it's what, say 10 prints in a box set for
Yeah.
$150.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, what is that, $10 each? Less than? Something like that?
Yeah. So it ends up being a very, very reasonable amount. And I can only really afford to sell them like that because I can sort of mass produce them all at one time. But if I have like a straggler order that comes in after I've exhausted the stuff I have, it's a lot of work to make them. But if I make them all at once, then it's worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.